Good day, YouTube. Today's topic is your financial situation and how that relates to the military, regardless of branch. Now, of course, I speak about the Air Force and my experience and what I've seen. I'm not the spokesperson for the Air Force. So I'm just sharing you my experience, what I've seen. Like I said, finances is very important. And how does that apply to you as a military member? Let me give you a short story. When I joined the Air Force, one day, actually the day that I was going to leave for basic training, I was ready with a whole bunch of people, and they called out my last name, and I walked up to the counter, and they said, "You can't leave today for basic training." And I said, "Why?" They said, "We just pulled your credit report right now, and you haven't made a payment to this credit card." And they were right. So I said, "I have to leave today. How do we make this happen?" "Well, can you make a payment?" I said, "I don't have any money." And they said, "Well, somebody's going to have to make a payment." So I called my father at the age of 24. I was 24. Said, "Dad, can you write a check to this credit card company and fax over a copy of that check as proof so the Air Force can let me go to basic training and I'll pay you back?" My dad said, "Don't worry about that. Here's a check. Go make your life. Go do good things in your life." And that's what I did. But the military will check our credit report or our credit score as part of entrance to the military and ongoing, especially when it comes to your clearance, because they want to see that we are financially responsible. Now, I began my journey as a 24-year-old individual, young guy, who had made some mistakes. Luckily, it wasn't to the point where it was just too much. Because if that was the case, the military will say you're a liability and a risk. And there are reasons why they don't want people like that. And that's because somebody could say, "Hey, how about I give you some money to help pay your bills and you give me some information on what you do and what you see in the military." And that I can go into depth further into that, but I'm not going to. You get the point. I was reading an article that talks about that financial responsibility should be a life skill. Regardless if you're young, old, military, or civilian, it doesn't matter. It should be a life skill. For example, in high school, do they teach about basic financial readiness? How to write a check, if you still write checks. Things like that, how to pay your bills, the importance of that. In most cases, the answer is no. And that's an example of an important topic. Let's look at your situation as an individual. Did your parents teach you about finances, or did somebody teach you about finances? Often the answer is no, that's not the case. In some cases, and there are people who do that, who teach their younger children how to deal with finances. That's great to see, but that's probably not the norm. I have several examples. And here's the thing. When you join the military, as far as the Air Force, at basic training, at your first duty station, enlisted and officer are going to get financial appointments. The requirement is one appointment, and that is for Air Force, whether it's FTEC, which stands for First Term Airman Center, or First Duty Station for officers. It's a 1-hour class or so. They talk about finances. They say, "Here's what we can do for you. We don't charge you for anything. We have these services. We can meet with you individually, with your family, with your unit." So the education is there. It's probably overkill, but that's a good thing because it's a life skill that young, old, military or civilian, finances will always be an important part of our lives, everybody's lives, to include retirees. When I was a financial counselor for the Airmen and Family Readiness Center, 8.5 years, I used to do a lot of briefings, and I used to love to do briefings, whether it was 2 people or 300 people. I remember one time I started off a briefing for civil engineering squadron, and I said, I had a quote up there on a big old screen. It was in the auditorium that said, "Finances will always be an important part of our lives." And then at the bottom it had 3 initials. And it was my icebreaker. Those were my initials because I was quoting myself. And I'm sure a lot of the people thought that was cheesy, but you know what? I got a reaction. It's true. That statement, finances will always be an important part of our lives, is incredibly true. And here's the thing. I'm not saying, speaking for myself, that you have to love the topic of finances. But if you're a military member or if you're married, you should at least be very good with the basics because your career could depend on it. Even if it doesn't depend on it, we should at least know the basics. And if we expand on that into investing and debt or credit, whatever, any financial topic that we want above the basics, that's great. But at least know the basics. Here's a scenario. What happens when you have a couple, married couple, and one of them is the primary financial expert? He or she pays the bills, looks at the bank statements, looks at the credit reports, looks at anything with finances. What happens when they get a divorce, if this couple were to get a divorce? Or what happens if the financial person passes away? The person left behind is going to struggle. And would we want to be an individual that's 50, 60 years old, financially struggling? Obviously, the answer is no. Does that ever happen? Yes, unfortunately. And that's how come at home I deal with all the finances. And I was with my wife a few days ago, long weekend, and I said, I need to show you how to log in, what the password is, what these accounts are, when the bills are due. I write a few checks here and there, not many, or I'll go to a website and I'll electronically pay the bill. Excuse me. But communication is very important. Obviously, I don't have any water here. I wanted to make this video outside, but it's windy, so the wind messes up my video. Now, what if you are in a financial situation that's maybe not the best? I've been there. Remember, that's how I started. The good news is if you are in the military, you can actually get assistance. But you have to be very careful who gives you assistance. Military installations have financial counselors, regardless of branch. All of them do. And they offer free services. They are not advisors. They are financial counselors. When I was a financial counselor, I used to educate people and say, I've given you 5 options that we can think of. Now you go out there and select the best one for yourself, which is a good thing. You have to be very careful, especially if you're financially desperate in a situation that's not good, of who you approach, because there are agencies out there that are going to charge you and maybe not have the best interest for you. So always be careful. With that said, predatory lending or payday loans are never good. Never. I used to ask a question, when is the only good time to visit a payday lender? And that's a trick question. The answer is never. Unfortunately, people and service members still would do that. If you have an emergency, your military installation will have programs, financial programs, to assist you with interest-free loans, but it has to be an emergency. Stay away from payday lenders, rent-to-own establishments. Be careful of scams that are out there that are promising you this, but in the end, they don't do that. So there are a lot of agencies, like I said, on base or off base that can help you. They can meet with you in a class, or they can meet with you individually. It's definitely private information. When I used to do financial briefings or appointments, in 1 week, let's just say I had 20 appointments. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. The good news is we're talking about a very private topic, and a lot of people are embarrassed, understandably, but they shouldn't be, because I speak for myself. After the next appointment and the next appointment, I would forget about the previous person and his or her details. I'd remember a face, but the details I wouldn't, because I would have so many appointments. So it's a very private topic, like I said. It's a life skill that we should have. I speak from been on both sides of the road, the bad and the good, and I have a lot of years of experience. The School of Hard Knocks, the Air Force trained me when I was a financial counselor. I can't stress how important this is. A lot of people don't care about financial topics, videos, but it's still very important. This and health. Health is another thing that I've talked about in the past. That's what I wanted to talk about. Does the military expect you to be financially responsible? Yes, all branches do. I don't speak for them, but I know for a fact that the answer is yes. There are programs out there to help us, the service members, and our families. And the older we get, we should slow it down and be on autopilot where our finances and our financial planning takes care of itself. At least that's what my goal is. And I've talked to both of my children, my son and my daughter, about finances. And I'll leave you with this. My wife and I have not always agreed, but in the end, we've adjusted, we've worked well together, and it's the difference between night and day. When I joined the Air Force and I left for basic training to today is night and day. Hopefully you found this video to be helpful. Ask questions, do what's best for yourself. Have a great day. One thing that I want to add that I forgot to talk about was if you are financially stressed, that's going to have an impact on your military career in the sense that you're not thinking about your job as the primary thing or the mission or whatever you're supposed to be doing with your career. You're doing your job, but it's going to suffer because you're thinking about whatever your financial situation is. So that's like I might say, it's very important. There are resources out there. Take advantage of them. Get them back in line if they're not where they're supposed to. That way you can do a better job for your team.